In an article recently in the Sun Sentinel, there was a point made that there aren't many people around who experienced both the Great Depression of the 1930s and the current major recession today in the 2009. Sitting next to me is someone who's done both. He is Eugene Sobel. He is a Director Emeritus of the First Southern Bank in Florida. He started the bank at an age when, after most people retire, in fact.
About 20 years ago.
About 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. The recession, what do you remember about the Great Depression? Let's start there.
Well, I remember quite a few things. Of course, you must remember that I'm talking from memory, and that if some of the facts are not as up to date as they should be, I'll do my very best.
Great.
What I remember mostly, in particular, are the bread lines, the coffee lines, the bank failures, and I'll be glad to answer any questions that you may have.
You know, we talked before about bank failures. Your dad had some money in the bank, and tell us that story, what the sequence of events was.
The bank that my dad had the money in, I believe, was called the U.S. Bank. It was in Brooklyn at that time, and my dad had $4,000 invested with the bank at the time. Mm-hmm. I shouldn't say invested. That was the cash amount that he had with it. And I do recall at one point when the bank closed, he was rather depressed. And a year or two later, he was advised that he could come to a faraway branch and pick up 10% of that amount. And we did. We traveled, I presume, at least 30 to 45 minutes by train, which, by the way, only cost a nickel at the time. Mm-hmm. And we reached this particular branch, and the line at 4 o'clock in the morning was so long that we were very disappointed. But my dad found someone there who had stood in line, sort of a beggar type, and he asked him whether he could purchase his place. And he nodded and said very quickly, yes. And I believe my dad gave him $1, and we took his place and were up near the front. And we collected, eventually, $400 of that money. That's about as much as I can tell you about that.
If we bring the clock forward to 2008, 2009, how does what you see today compare to what you saw back in the 30s?
My personal feeling is that the present recession does not compare or is not as fatal as it was back in the 1930s. Some of the things that I believe, and again, these are my impressions, mm-hmm. is we did not have unemployment compensation. There was no health benefits. Mm-hmm. It was, in my opinion...
And no Social Security at that time.
And no Social Security. Right. And of course, it wasn't until 1932, when Franklin Roosevelt started the WPA, that I think did a world of good, that I think, again, this recession is nowhere as near as difficult as it was then.
And of course, as you remarked to me, when you go out today, go to a restaurant, it's hard to believe that there's a recession on when you see so many people out there eating. And this wasn't true in 1930s at all, was it?
Absolutely not true. The bread lines and coffee lines were just as thick as they could be.
Hmm. If you look at the bank that you're now the Emeritus Director,
right?
How have you managed to fare through this current recession?
We're a rather small but solid bank, and I think we've held up fairly good. In fact, the government offered us an $11 million TARP, which at first we weren't sure that we would take, and we finally did take it, but haven't used it yet, and there is a 5% fee for that. We've invested in another government fund that will pay us 5%, if and when we find we'll have something worthwhile to invest in, we will do so. But if not, we'll be returning that money to the government without any cost to us.
Mm-hmm. Is it your sense we're going to get through this recession?
Since I indicated earlier that I thought this recession was not as severe as the last one, I very definitely have a positive outlook on this one, and I do think within a year, possibly two, and I hope I'm still around, that things will have gotten straightened out. And I think Obama is starting to do a job that looks very fruitful to me.
You've been in business for a lot of years.
Yes.
What wisdom do you have after all of these years, being through two major, one depression, one severe recession now? Mm-hmm. What words of wisdom would you have to young people today?
I don't know whether they'll listen or not, but I do say that I think the credit card is one of the biggest fallouts of the present time. Young people particularly building up their credits and then being unable to pay for them and having high taxes in addition is probably one of the worst enigmas that we possibly have at the present time.
And of course, that's been said also in other places, that the current worldwide crisis is in fact can be laid at the doorstep of enormous world debt. So not only at the individual level, but at the world level, there's been enormous debt, which has helped create this collapse in the financial system.
I believe that what you're saying is absolutely true, and I would be very much in favor of seeing that some way of squelching that could be accomplished.
So you're in favor of some additional regulations on banking and the financial industry?
I would think that would be very helpful.
Yeah. Well, Gene Sobel, thank you so much for sharing this with us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.